We are joined this morning by Batangas 1st District Representative Leandro Leviste. Good morning, Congressman. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning.
Could you walk us through your proposal for the DPWH to be able to reprice or cancel some parts of the 1.6 trillion peso worth of projects? How did you arrive at 400 billion pesos in potential savings?
That's 25%, which is approximately what in the Senate hearings came out to be the kickbacks that were given from these projects. And the DPWH sets the prices in the budget. And this week, we're actually approving the 2026 DPWH budget of 625 billion pesos. And there is 1 trillion plus in the 2025 budget. So the total of 1.6 trillion of total contracts in the General Appropriations Act of 25 and 26, 25% of which is 400 billion.
But we're heading to the last quarter of 2025. Do you still think that it's possible to get a hold of the 25% to get it back?
That's a very good question, and part of what I think the public doesn't know, that the 2025 projects are at approximately 30% completion as of today. Because there's a period until the end of the succeeding year, or December 2026, to complete the 2025 projects. Many of them were actually just bid out and awarded in the second quarter of this year. Many of them also have not made substantial progress pending inquiries on DPWH and haven't received advance or down payments on their work. In the case of the Lemery Batangas terminated flood control project of 95.99 million pesos, the contractor agreed not to get paid at all, just not to be scrutinized for appeared to be both substandardly built and also technically unnecessarily located flood control project with no permits from the local government. So that's one of the new things we'd like to bring to most people's attention. And the other is that the Government Procurement Reform Act gives the DPWH the upper hand in terminating contracts because, number one, there is a provision for termination for unlawful acts. And the DPWH at this point can put pressure on contractors to not build substandard projects and not engage in bid rigging. But insofar as these two acts have been reportedly prevalent in the DPWH, then we would find some basis to terminate the contracts there. But more importantly, the contracts have a provision for termination for convenience. So even if the DPWH just says that it's now impractical to proceed on these contracts, it can have a very low burden of proof to terminate these contracts and at most only pay the percent of the contract that has already been done, not any penalties for the lost profits of the contractor.
Ideally, it would be nice to get the money back from all of these contracts, but also wouldn't that set us back with the government's infrastructure programs? And where do you propose we start? Do we start with the top contractors, or how do we conduct a fair review of all? Or is it just an across-the-board 25% that you're pitching here?
Yes, it's fair to say that we should start with projects that are currently being investigated and have been pointed out to be substandard. So I find it somewhat ironic that there are so many investigations on DPWH projects now, and people haven't been calling for a not only suspension but also termination of some of these questionable contracts. The economic effect of canceling some of these contracts would be to the extent that it has been reported that at least flood control projects only have 35% of the contract price actually going into the project, and other projects are reported in the Senate hearings to have only 50% of the contract price actually going into the project. Instead of those payments being made to the contractors, they can, number one, be used by government for any other more efficient use. But second, quickly rebid with the projects at a lower price.
Oh. Pero syempre, ang hirap, hindi ba mahirap naman din yun? I mean, wouldn't you want to conduct individual reviews of these projects and kasi baka kung magkamali ka din tapos may nilabas na rin yung contractor, kawawa naman kung baga parang nadamay lang siya at hindi naman siya kumbaga nagkaroon ng malaking patong dito. How do we apply this fairly?
Well, definitely the rate isn't the same across all projects because, as was reported in some of these Senate hearings, the horizontal projects have 35% of their contract price actually going into the project, and vertical projects have maybe 50% of their contract price actually going into the project, with the rest being either kickback or profit of the contractor. But at least those numbers give you a feeling that there is not a tight margin on these projects relative to their direct cost. The reports are that bid rigging is widespread and that these costs require the contractors to cut corners on their projects. So as unfortunate as it is to say, it's more of a question of what projects should not be canceled than what projects should be canceled. But of course, you should start with the ones that are, number one, most questioned already. And then it's just really a question of why cancellation or repricing hasn't been raised in the first place for these projects. But secondly, I want to emphasize that the most important thing that Congress will do this week is we are scheduled to vote on the 2026 budget on Friday, and there has not been a repricing of DPWH projects from the initial version that was submitted to Congress in the middle of this year to today. So without needing to sacrifice anything on the actual projects, without even needing to go into unwinding 2025 contracts, the very straightforward thing to do is for us to reprice all the 2026 projects before we approve the budget.
We do know that a review would slow down approvals on and development of public infrastructure. What do you think could the effect be, and how do we manage the effect on also not just infrastructure but also the economy? It does play into public spending, and it is worth to note that back during the Pinoy administration, public spending slowed down because the former DPWH Secretary Sing Son wanted to clean up the mechanisms in the DPWH. Wouldn't a complete review and reassessment be very complex and time-consuming? I understand though your point na kung may pera dyan, no, ibalik natin yan sa kaban ng bayan kasi alam na natin yung katotohanan. But on the other hand, no, this will have impact on other sectors like the economy, like infrastructure, like also yung the development and possibly turning off quality developers or contractors.
First of all, again, I think it's more of a question of what projects of the DPWH should not be canceled. I don't think there are many people who can point to projects that are not overpriced and not substandardly built. But the 2026 projects are not yet under construction. So it would not come at great cost to the country to reprice those before they are even approved. And even for those that are already approved and under construction in 2025, for them to be canceled, repriced, and rebid would not take more than just a few months. So, of course, you go with those that are easiest to put off, but that even the best ones of them still cannot escape the allegation that they are overpriced because the prices are quite consistent across the country because DPWH sets them in their central office based on the cost of materials, and the practice of having to find ways to cut corners on projects has been reported to be widespread and systemic in DPWH. So the best case is still that on a contract price, only, for example, 50% of that contract price actually goes into the economy. So you're going to save 100% of the contract price and only going to forgo 50%, let's say, of it in terms of what circulates into the economy. And the impact then is that you're going to reduce the wealth accumulated by the people benefiting from these contracts. And in exchange, the government will have savings that it can reuse for a more efficient use.
You've proposed redirecting 400 billion pesos to health and education. Where would you like to see those funds allocated?
Well, the 255 billion pesos flood control budget has been reallocated to those two already, the largest being 60 billion into PhilHealth. There's also another 30 plus billion into medical assistance and 22.5 billion into classrooms, 9 billion into the tertiary education subsidy, and there's also a proposal to have 12.3 billion into state universities and colleges. But the response to your point on not also reducing infrastructure spending is that these same funds can also go back into the projects in addition to funding health and education, because when you have savings, then you can do more things with the same budget. And the part of the intended health and education budget would also be the construction of health and infrastructure, education infrastructure, such as classrooms, health centers, and hospitals, which in my district at least are much badly needed. Actually, the inspiration for this proposal now is because all us district representatives are looking for ways to increase the budget of our respective districts at this point when Congress is finalizing the 2026 budget. And we're being told that there is not enough fiscal space, but because there is, I think now, a established fact that projects are overpriced, then it just seems obvious to me that we can fund all of these government priorities by finding savings in these existing projects.
Do you agree with the President's directive to realign flood control funds to DSWD? Kausap namin yung DSWD last week at sabi nila, ilalagay nga nila yan sa AIC, sa Sustainable Livelihood Program, where we ask, how do you ensure that these will not be used for political posturing and purposes? Sabi nila, that goes through a stringent process and subject to review. Pero do you agree with that, realigning flood control funds to the DSWD?
Yes, when I was talking about the health and education realignments in the 255 billion peso flood control budget, the DSWD is actually one of the other agencies that received some of that realignment, but is not more than maybe 12% of the total realignment. The DSWD is at least a less corrupt use of funds than a DPWH project, because more than 50%, I would say, of those funds actually goes into its intended use. It's a much higher percent when you're talking about cash transfers. But I think the easiest way to argue this is not to say DSWD or health or education over infrastructure. It's more infrastructure versus less infrastructure. Because as a policy matter moving forward, there's really no way to defend that we shouldn't lower the prices when they're established to be high. Because if it's good to have, for example, 3 solar streetlights, then it's even better to have 4, 5, or 6 solar streetlights if it is determined that solar streetlights are 30 to 50 to 100% overpriced.
The DPWH submitted their budget already or defended it before the Congress. Are you happy with the way it's been stripped off of all these extra costs? Tingin nyo, yun na ba yung natanggalan na yon ng mga patong-patong, or pwede pa siyang bawasan talaga?
That's why I'm bringing this up, because we haven't removed what you just referred to at all on the remaining projects. The price on the projects that were proposed that are not flood control are the same as they were before this scandal erupted. So if we want to prove that the 2026 budget is better than the 2025 budget, then we need to lower the prices. If we are not lowering the prices, then we are sanctioning all of the same practices that people are complaining about now in the 2025 budget. And in addition to that, the flood control budget was removed, but I will be sharing more about this and bringing it up more over the week before we vote on the budget. Congress actually added road projects and other projects to the DPWH budget that have yet to be scrutinized. So flood control is not the only sin here. Road maintenance, for example, asphalt overlays, reblocking, these practices that our citizens are very familiar with when they see supposedly finely built roads being blocked or asphalt overlaid are another source of overpricing contracts, and practices like that have not been clamped down on at all. In fact, they have been increased from the initial submission of the DPWH budget.
So the problem remains to be in the budget. Actually, may mga bringing up na rin, no? Bukod nga sa flood control, we should be looking at roads, classrooms, even health centers, and how money is spent on those projects. But thank you for bringing that up, and we hope to have more attention this way. Thank you for explaining to us this proposal. We have Batangas 1st District Representative Leandro Leviste this morning talking about the DPWH budget. Maraming salamat.